This story begins at a dinner table. Warm food, familiar faces, a moment that should have passed quietly, but didn't. I thanked my grandfather for a $200 check, the kind of small gesture families exchange without thinking. He stopped carving the turkey, looked straight at me, and said something that split the room in half. In that second, I knew the problem wasn't money, it was truth. And once truth enters a room like that, nothing stays the same. This isn't a story about getting revenge, and it's not about watching anyone get what they deserve. It's about what happens when the people we trust most quietly rewrite reality, and we don't realize it until it's too late. About how love can exist right next to deception. About how silence, when it lasts too long, becomes its own kind of damage. As we listen, maybe we don't rush to take sides. Maybe we just stay with the feeling. Because many of us have been at a table like this, where one sentence changed how we saw everyone sitting there. Let's step into the story together. Just listen. Sometimes the truth doesn't arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives with a knife paused in midair and a look you can't forget. My name is Rhett Calder, and I'm about to tell you the whole truth, the kind you don't say out loud because it destroys families. But before I share my story, I want to know you're here with me. Just say listening in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far a story like this can reach, and sometimes knowing someone is there makes all the difference. If you're new here, please subscribe. Not because I'm chasing numbers, but because this channel is where people like us come to be believed, to be heard, and to remember we're not crazy for calling betrayal what it is. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. $200. That's what my mother said Grandpa Elias had scraped together for me this year. And I played along long enough to say thank you with my mouth while my gut stayed tight. The check sat in my fingers like a prop. Grandpa was halfway through carving the turkey blade, gliding through brown skin steam, rising the whole table lit by candles and fake warmth when I looked up and said clear as day, "Thank you for the $200, Grandpa." The knife stopped mid-slice. Not a pause, not a hesitation, a full stop like the metal had struck bone. Grandpa turned his head slowly and fixed his eyes on mine the way he used to when I was a kid, and he needed me to understand something that mattered. His voice didn't shake. It didn't swell. It landed. "The gift I wired you was $500,000. For one beat, nobody moved. My sister's face drained of color. My mother's fork trembled against the plate. Even the air felt heavier, like the room had swallowed its own oxygen. And I remember thinking with a cold clarity that made me sick that the biggest theft of my life hadn't happened in some foreign server farm or on a dark web marketplace. It happened at our Thanksgiving table with family smiling like nothing was wrong. So who takes $500,000 from an 87-year-old man and replaces it with a $200 lie, and what kind of people do you have to be to try to make sure the one person who would notice never showed up to dinner? 3 days earlier, I was in Austin, Texas, in my apartment that doubles as a war room. 3 monitors, glowing blue and white codes scrolling on one screen, a map of IP hops on another, and a spreadsheet of timestamps on the third, because that's what my life looks like when I'm doing my job right. I hunt digital thieves for a living. Not in the movie way, not in the hoodie and hacker voice way, but in the slow, surgical way where you follow a pattern until it gives up the truth. I work in cybersecurity and fraud tracing, and my brain is trained to hear what people mean underneath what they say. It's not paranoia when it keeps being correct. Austin is quiet compared to the coast, and I like it that way. No one here knows my mother's version of me, the one she rolls out at family gatherings like a cardboard cutout. I don't go back to Carmel much. The flight is a hassle, sure, but the real reason is simpler. Every visit turns into a performance, and my family treats emotions like something to manage, not something to feel. My dad, Gordon, has mastered the art of disappearing in plain sight. He can sit in a room full of people, glass of wine in his hand, eyes on a game he's not really watching, and vanish so completely you forget he's even there. My mother, Marianne, does the opposite. She fills space. She curates it. She makes the house smell like cinnamon and accomplishment and insists everything is fine in a tone that dares you to disagree. And my sister Sloane has always chased a certain kind of shine. She's 33 now, beautiful in the way that photographs, well, always one step away from posting her life like proof she's winning. She also has a history with my money that she likes to pretend is a misunderstanding. Years ago, she called me about a business opportunity, said she just needed a short-term loan to get in early. $3,000. She promised she'd pay me back the moment it took off. It didn't. It crashed in a cloud of vague excuses and deleted links. When I asked for repayment 6 months later, she laughed like I'd made a joke. Seriously, Rhett, you're being petty. We're siblings. She said it the way some people say, relax right after they've crossed a line, like the word itself is supposed to erase the damage. I learned then that Sloane's moral compass points toward whatever makes her feel safe and admired in the moment. That memory was sitting in the back of my mind when her name lit up my phone 3 days before Thanksgiving. I almost let it go to voicemail. I was in the middle of tracing a spear phishing campaign that had already cleaned out 2 small businesses, and my focus was the only thing standing between another victim and a wiped-out bank account. But Sloane doesn't call for nothing, and she especially doesn't call me during the workday unless she wants something. I answered, and she hit me with that overly bright voice she saves for when she's trying to sound harmless. Hey, she said, and she used a nickname I haven't heard since we were teenagers, like she thought it would soften me. So about Thanksgiving. The way she drew it out made my shoulders tense. People who have good news don't stall. What about it, I said, keeping my eyes on the screen while my other hand hovered over my mouse like I could control 2 realities at once. I was thinking, she said, and there was a tiny breath in there, a little recalibration, like she was reading off a script and trying not to lose her place. Maybe you should skip it this year. I stopped scrolling. My fingers went still. Skip it. Yeah, she rushed on, it's just... Grandpa Elias has been really tired lately. The doctor said he shouldn't have too much excitement. You know how he gets when you visit. He wants to stay up talking and he'll push himself. She let out a laugh that sounded manufactured, the kind you hear in a voicemail greeting. We're keeping it quiet. Just local family. I live in Austin. My family lives in Carmel. That distance has always been convenient for them when they want a version of events to stand unchallenged. Since when does Grandpa want quiet? I asked. Since he turned 87, she said quickly, and since the cardiologist told Mom he needs less stress. That part could have been true. Grandpa has been slowing down. It's hard watching it happen. He's the only person in my family who ever looked at me like my mind wasn't a problem to be corrected. When I was a kid, he taught me to tie my shoes, to cast a fishing line, to shake hands properly. When I left for college, he gave me a leather portfolio and told me to build a life I could stand behind. He's the reason I learned to treat evidence like sacred ground. So yes, the idea that he might need calm didn't sound insane. What didn't track was Sloane, of all people, insisting I save him from the burden of my presence. Then she delivered the line that made the hair on my arms lift. Plus, she added lightly, you should probably save the airfare. Flights from Texas aren't cheap. I know you do well, but still. There it was, the tell. Sloane has never cared about my finances unless my finances were in her vicinity. She never called to ask if I was okay when I pulled all-nighters in college. She never offered to split a bill. She never once worried about the cost of a plane ticket, unless the trip itself threatened whatever she wanted to keep contained. I didn't argue. Arguing would have fed her information. I kept my voice neutral, the same tone I use with suspects who don't know I'm already 5 steps ahead. I'll think about it, I said. Great, she replied too fast, like she'd been holding her breath. Love you. Bye. She hung up before I could say anything back. I stared at my monitors, but the code on the screen blurred. The conversation had the same rhythm as the phishing emails I dissect for work. The words were polite. The logic was plausible. The intent underneath felt wrong. In my job, when something feels wrong, you don't talk yourself out of it. You verify. You pull data. You check the logs. I sat there for a full minute, listening to the hum of my computer fans, feeling that familiar click in my brain when a case file opens itself. Then, almost casually, like I was proving myself wrong, I picked up my phone and opened my banking app. There's an account I almost never look at. A joint account Grandpa Elias set up for me when I turned 18. He seeded it with a few thousand back then and told me it was for emergencies, a cushion, a way to breathe if life ever knocked me flat. I used it once in college when my laptop died right before finals, and I paid it back within 6 months because Grandpa's trust felt like something you repay. Since then, I've let the account sit earning dust and tiny interest like a quiet promise between us. The balance looked normal at first glance, a couple thousand, nothing dramatic. Exactly the kind of number that tells your brain to move on. But my thumb didn't move away. It hovered, because that call with Sloane had planted a question in me that wouldn't stop tapping. Why would she want me gone? And if she wanted me gone, what was happening while I was gone? I tapped into the transaction history just to reassure myself, just to confirm my own paranoia was doing what it always does, and overreacting. And as the screen loaded, I had the strangest thought, sharp and quiet like a voice from somewhere deep. If you don't click one more step, you'll never know what they took. My finger paused above the list. I could still back out. I could still pretend I hadn't looked. But I'd learned the hard way that some doors once closed don't open again. So I clicked and I waited for the pass to show its hand. The list populated in a clean column of dates and amounts, the kind of sterile formatting banks use to make money feel like math instead of life. For a second, everything looked ordinary. Deposits, interest, a few small transfers from years ago. And then my eyes caught a number that didn't belong in any version of my reality. $500,000. My stomach dropped so fast it felt physical, like a hand had reached inside me and yanked. August 14th. Incoming wire transfer $500,000. The memo line read like something Grandpa would write if he'd ever use memo lines. For Rhett. With love. Grandpa. I stared at it until my vision tunneled. $500,000 doesn't accidentally appear in a joint account and then politely sit there. It's a life event. It's the kind of thing you call someone about. It's the kind of thing you cry about. It's the kind of thing Grandpa Elias would have talked through with me, not because he needed permission, but because he always believed money without meaning is just noise. My finger scrolled down one line. August 15th. Outgoing wire transfer $499,800. Destination external account. Memo investment opportunity. My throat went dry. 24 hours. They'd taken it in one day. Not even subtle. But then I saw what made it worse, what made it smart. The remaining balance. Not zero. Not wiped clean. They left a couple thousand behind, just enough to make the account look like what it had always looked like. Just enough to avoid triggering certain automated alerts that fire when a balance hits rock bottom. Just enough to keep me from noticing unless I did exactly what I'd just done, click one more step. My hand shook. I set my phone down on the desk carefully, like it might explode. In my work, when you find the smoking gun, you don't stare at it and panic. You start building a chain. I opened my laptop and pulled up the same account on the bank's website because apps simplify and websites keep receipts. The wire details were there, confirmation numbers, timestamps down to the minute. I felt my pulse in my ears. The case wasn't hypothetical anymore. It was real, and it was mine. I called the bank. Not the customer service number that routes you through a maze of cheerful recordings, but the fraud prevention line I knew how to reach because I've spent years dealing with institutions that only move fast when you use the right language. After 2 transfers and a long hold, a tired-sounding woman picked up. Fraud prevention, she said, and gave me her name. I told her mine, told her the account, told her I needed to dispute a wire transfer immediately. She asked the usual verification questions. I answered them on autopilot, my eyes locked on the transaction history like it might rewrite itself if I looked hard enough. Finally, she said, "Mr. Calder, I'm showing that wire was initiated with valid login credentials and 2-factor authentication." My jaw tightened. I didn't initiate it. "The IP address on file is located in Carmel, California," she continued. "Is that a location you visit regularly?" "My family lives there," I said, and hearing the word family out loud made my skin crawl. "But I haven't been there in months." There was a pause filled with typing. "And you're certain you didn't authorize anyone to access this account on your behalf?" "Completely," I said. "I don't share credentials. I don't authorize family members. No one has my devices." The rep hesitated like she was reading something that was about to shift the whole conversation. "Mr. Calder," she said carefully, "we also have documentation on file authorizing an additional user to act on the account." "What documentation?" "A power of attorney form," she replied. Signed by you on August 10th. It grants authorization to Marianne Calder, my mother. The room tilted. It wasn't dramatic. It was that sudden sense of gravity changing inside your own home. I never signed a power of attorney, I said, every word clipped. The signature matches our records, she replied. Then your records are being used against me, I said. That signature is forged. More typing. I'm flagging the account for investigation, she said. You'll need to file a formal fraud report. I can email you the link. We'll also need to verify your identity and ask some additional questions. I let her. I answered everything. Device models, security prompts, last known logins. While she talked, my eyes kept flicking back to the dates. August 10th POA filed. August 14th wire in. August 15th wire out. It wasn't random. It was staged. Whoever did this didn't just take money. They prepared the legal scaffolding first, like they knew exactly what the bank would require if questions came later. When I finally ended the call, my coffee had gone cold and my hands were still shaking. A notification blinked on my screen from the case I'd been working before Sloan called. Another victim, another compromise, another digital crime. And for the first time in my career, I felt something I wasn't trained for. Betrayal that wasn't anonymous. Betrayal that had my mother's name attached. The email from the bank arrived a minute later with a PDF attachment. Power of attorney. The document looked legitimate at first glance, clean formatting, proper legal language, signature block at the bottom with my name typed, and a signature that at a distance could have passed as mine. That was the point. They didn't need perfection. They needed plausible enough to slip through a clerk's checklist. I zoomed in until the pixels broke apart. My signature has quirks. Everyone's does. Mine has one that I've never told anyone about because I learned early that family is not a security system. Anytime I sign a legal document, I add a tiny mark in the upper right of the signature field. Not a full initial, not something anyone would notice unless they were looking for it, just a small diagonal tick like a breath. It started as a paranoid habit after watching too many contracts get contested in my line of work. It became a fingerprint. I scanned the signature block. The looping R was there. The sharp downstroke on the C was there. The overall shape was right, but the tick wasn't. The space where it should have been sat clean and empty like a missing tooth. I leaned back in my chair and felt cold spread under my ribs. You can fake a signature by copying its shape. You can't fake the private habit you don't know exists, which meant whoever created this didn't have me sitting there signing. They had samples. They had time. They practiced. They built it. I saved the PDF into a new folder on my desktop and titled it what it was. POA Forged. Then I started doing what I always do when I need reality to stay solid. I documented. Screenshots of the wire in and wire out. A copy of the transaction detail page. The email header from the bank. The PDF saved locally and backed up. Timestamps written down in a separate file. I didn't trust my emotions. I trusted redundancy. Somewhere in the middle of that, my phone buzzed again. A text from Sloan. So you're definitely not coming Thursday, right? Just want to make sure so Mom doesn't overbuy food. I stared at the message until it blurred. They weren't just hoping I'd skip dinner. They were confirming it. They were counting on my absence. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. A part of me wanted to call her, scream, demand answers, force the truth out of her like pulling a splinter. But that part was emotional. And emotion is loud. If you confront someone before you understand the shape of their lie, you teach them what to fix. I typed slowly, deliberately. Actually, I changed my mind. I'll be there. The response came almost instantly. Really? Are you sure? I thought you said work was crazy right now. I hadn't said that. My pulse steadied, not because I was calm, but because the pattern was forming cleanly now. I wrote back, work can wait. Family's important. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Okay, great. See you Thursday. I set my phone down, opened the airline app, and booked a flight to California. Not because I wanted a holiday, because I wanted a crime scene while the footprints were still fresh. My bank report link sat open in another tab. I began filling it out with the same precision I'd use if a client had called me in panic. And as I typed, my eyes kept drifting back to that signature block on the PDF, the missing tick, the two perfect curves, the way my own name had been turned into a weapon. I held the document on my screen like it was evidence in a trial because in my mind it already was. If that signature was missing my mark, then somebody had been rehearsing my identity. Somebody had taken time to become me on paper. And the more I stared at the file name, the more the dread sharpened into something else. It wasn't Sloan I was afraid of. Sloan was messy. Sloan was impulsive. Sloan stole like a person who thinks she'll talk her way out later. This was different. This was planned. This was patient. This was the kind of fraud built by someone who understands systems and appearances and how to make a lie look respectable. I closed my laptop, grabbed a suitcase from the closet, and started packing with hands that still wouldn't stop trembling. Outside my window, Austin moved on like nothing had happened. Cars slid down the street. A neighbor walked a dog. Normal life. Meanwhile, somewhere in Carmel, someone was preparing a Thanksgiving table and deciding how to turn $500,000 into a $200 story. And I was about to walk straight into their performance with the truth in my pocket. I didn't sleep much after I booked the flight. Not because I was afraid, but because my brain does what it always does when something stops making sense. It builds a map. I had the PDF open on my main monitor, the wire details on the second, and a blank document on the third where I started laying out dates like stakes in the ground. August 10th, the power of attorney was filed. August 14th, $500,000 landed in my joint account with Grandpa Elias. August 15th, almost all of it vanished into an external account. My hands kept wanting to shake and I kept forcing them to do useful work instead. I zoomed in on the signature block again until the ink looked like a coastline. The overall shape was close enough to fool a clerk on a busy day, but the deeper you looked, the more it gave itself away. The pressure was too uniform. Real signatures breathe. They speed up, they slow down, they drag in one corner and lift in another. This one didn't. It was smooth in a way that only happens when somebody traced and cleaned and stitched a version of me together from samples. And there it was, the quiet proof no one else would notice, my tiny diagonal tick, the private mark I always add in the upper right of the signature field, was missing. That wasn't a mistake you make if I was physically present. That's a mistake you make when you're guessing, when you're recreating, when you're building a counterfeit identity by study instead of consent. I leaned back and stared at it until my eyes burned. Whoever did this didn't just want the money. They wanted the bank to believe I had handed them permission with my own hand. That takes planning. That takes practice. That takes someone who understands systems, paperwork, and how institutions protect themselves. Sloan doesn't plan like that. Sloan doesn't practice anything unless it's a smile for a photo. She's the kind of person who borrows and hopes the universe forgives her. She's impulsive, emotional, and sloppy. A forged legal document submitted days in advance was not her signature style, which meant she was either being guided by someone smarter or she wasn't the one holding the pen at all. I shifted from the signature to the wire transfer destination. The bank interface only showed the last 4 digits, but I wasn't new to the way security works when you know where to look. I used what I had. The transaction confirmation number, the receiving bank name, the routing path. Some of what I did was straight professional method. Some of it was careful OSINT, and some of it was the kind of creative stitching you learn when you've spent years tracing money that doesn't want to be found. I wasn't hacking. I wasn't breaking into anything. I was building a picture from the pieces that were already exposed, the way investigators always do. Within an hour, I had a name that made my jaw go hard. Blaine Whitlock. The receiving account was newly opened, dated suspiciously close to the wire. The branch location sat right in the Carmel and Monterey orbit, close enough to be convenient, far enough to feel like not our house. I sat there with his name on my screen and listened to the hum of my computer because this was the moment the case stopped being a ghost and became a person. People have reputations. People leave footprints. People get sloppy when they think no one is looking. I searched him the way I search anyone I'm trying to understand, not with emotion, with curiosity. His LinkedIn popped up like a billboard. Wealth advisor, investment consultant, Founder. The kind of title stack people use when they want to sound like money without actually having to prove it. His profile photo was a suit and perfect teeth, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes because it's meant for clients, not friends. Every line of his bio was polished, empowering families, building legacy, strategic growth. He had endorsements from people with names like Chad and Brittany, who all praised his integrity in exactly the same tone. And then I saw the post that turned my stomach. A recent update dated just days after my money disappeared. Blaine standing with Sloane, her head tilted toward him, his arm wrapped around her like ownership. The caption was pure performance. Excited to announce my engagement to the incredible Sloane Calder. Here's to new beginnings. Ooh, I didn't blink. I clicked into Sloane's Instagram next because my sister has never met a privacy setting she couldn't ignore. It was all there. A timeline of destruction dressed up as self-care. A photo of crystal water and white sand with a caption about resetting. An infinity pool at sunset. A champagne flute. Then the close-up of her left hand with a ring that caught the light like a threat. I zoomed in until I could see the cut. Emerald. Big. Expensive. The kind of ring that isn't bought with casual money. Under the photo, she'd written something about being blessed, about finally feeling chosen. I took screenshots of everything one by one and saved them with file names that included dates and times because feelings don't hold up in a confrontation, but timestamps do. I built a folder structure the way I do on corporate cases. Transactions, POA, social, Blaine, Sloane, timeline. I added a document and started mapping events in plain language. Grandpa Wires gift, wires, money transferred out, vacation appears, engagement announced, ring appears. Every step aligned like dominoes. I wasn't satisfied with suspicion. I wanted the hard edges of proof. So I pushed further. I looked for the kind of purchases that usually follow a cash influx when people think they've gotten away with something. Travel, jewelry, luxury services. I anchored each assumption back to time and place. It wasn't about being petty. It was about creating a chain that couldn't be waved away as coincidence. The more I gathered, the clearer the pattern became. If that money funded a trip, it wasn't an accident. If that money funded a ring, it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was conversion. Stolen funds turned into status. And then circling back to the one part that still didn't fit, I opened the POA PDF again. Sloane could be greedy, but she isn't patient. She's not the type to sit at a desk and practice a signature until it looks clean enough for a bank file. She'd have tried to talk her way in, flirt her way in, cry her way in. This document didn't cry. It complied. It was designed to slide through a system. That felt like my mother. Marianne lives by systems. She lives by appearances. She knows how to fill out a form in a way that feels official. She knows which buttons to press and which words make people stop asking questions. I needed a comparison. Something physical. Something she'd written without thinking anyone would analyze it. I dug through a drawer in my desk and pulled out a birthday card she'd sent me last year. I'd kept it because she'd actually remembered, which is rare enough to feel like a miracle in that family. The handwriting on the envelope was neat, controlled, and slightly theatrical, like it wanted to be admired. I scanned it. Then I pulled the POA up side by side and started comparing details most people never notice. The angle of certain strokes, the way capital letters leaned, the way she crossed her T's with a slight upward flick instead of straight through, the way her G's had a subtle inward curve on the downstroke. It wasn't a courtroom-level handwriting analysis. It didn't need to be. I wasn't trying to convict her in that moment. I was trying to answer the question my body had already answered: who in my family had the temperament to build a lie that professional? The answer sat in the way those letters moved. My mother. I stared at the screens and felt something colder than anger settle in. It wasn't just that Marianne knew. It was that she likely orchestrated. Grandpa Elias had trusted her enough to call before wiring the gift to ask her to make sure I understood it came with love. She would have had access to the plan before I did. She would have had time to prepare the POA, time to set up the receiving path, time to coach Sloane into staying quiet, and to coach Blaine into looking respectable. That realization didn't make me want to scream. It made me want to stop giving them information. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call my sister. I didn't even text a threat. Instead, I shifted into what I call court mode. I printed bank statements. I printed the wire confirmations. I printed the POA PDF and marked the missing tick in red on my own copy. I printed screenshots of Sloane's posts with the dates visible. I printed Blaine's engagement announcement. I stacked it all into a leather portfolio Grandpa had given me when I graduated college, and the irony of that did something sharp to my chest. The same gift meant to help me look professional would now help me prove my family had stolen from me. I pulled my mini projector out of a cabinet. I use it for client presentations sometimes when a conference room doesn't have decent equipment. I checked that it worked. I packed extra cords. I saved the slide deck I was building in multiple places. I titled the first slide the way I title every case study when I need people to pay attention. Family Investment Opportunity, a case study in wire fraud. Subtitle, How $500 on dollars became $200. Then I rehearsed the beats, not because I wanted to perform, because timing is everything when someone is lying. You want the truth to land when they have no time to rearrange the room around it. My phone buzzed again while I was labeling files. Another message from Sloane. Just confirming you're really coming. Mom's planning portions. The wording was soft, but the urgency underneath was obvious. I answered like I was calm. Yep, landing tomorrow. See you then. The reply came fast. Wow. Okay. I thought you were slammed with work. I stared at that sentence and felt a small, bitter satisfaction. I hadn't told her I was slammed. She'd invented that story for me the same way she was trying to invent the rest of this one. And now she was slipping. I didn't press her. I just let the slip sit there, because when people think they're losing control, they make mistakes. The next day, Austin was warm and bright like it always is, and leaving it felt like stepping out of clean air. I boarded my flight with my laptop bag heavy at my shoulder, and my portfolio tucked under my arm like a shield. By the time we landed at SFO, the sky had turned that washed-out gray that makes California feel like it's holding its breath. Rain hit the windshield the moment I got the rental car. I drove south with the wipers working hard and my mind even harder. The highway was slick. Headlights smeared into lines. Everything outside looked blurred like I was driving into a memory I'd been trying to avoid. Carmel isn't far from Monterey, but the distance felt longer at night. The road narrowed. The wind picked up. The ocean appeared and disappeared in dark flashes. I kept thinking about Grandpa Elias's hands, the way they shake a little when he's tired, and how someone had used that fatigue as cover. When I reached the hotel in Monterey, the lobby smelled like bleach and fake pine. I checked in, carried my bags to a room that felt too quiet, and turned the desk into a command center. I spread out documents, set my laptop up, and started building the presentation with ruthless simplicity. Dates, amounts, names, screenshots. Each slide, one punch. No poetry, no pleading. Just the truth arranged so even a liar couldn't pretend it was a misunderstanding. I practiced the rhythm. 12 minutes for the full reveal. Strategic pauses. Just enough time for them to feel safe and then realize they aren't. Sometime after midnight, I sat back and stared at the title slide glowing in the dark. My reflection looked older than it should. I thought about the house in Carmel, about Marianne's candles and Sloane's smile and Gordon's silence. They were going to try to hand me a check for $200 and tell me to be grateful. They were going to try to make Grandpa Elias doubt his own memory. They were going to try to paint me as the problem if I resisted. I shut the laptop and forced myself to sleep for a couple hours. Morning came with rain tapping the window like a countdown. I dressed, packed everything carefully, and drove the last stretch to the house. When I pulled up to the curb, it looked exactly like it always had, polished and innocent, as if nothing criminal could ever happen behind those walls. My mother opened the door before I could knock. She was wearing the expensive sweater she saves for holidays. Her hair styled her smile already in place. She hugged me with perfect pressure, the kind of embrace that tells you she practiced in the mirror. Rhett, she said, like she was relieved. Then her eyes flicked past my shoulder. How long are you staying? It wasn't hello. It was inventory. I stepped inside and she asked the next question without missing a beat. Did you bring much with you? I kept my voice easy. Just what I need. Her smile tightened a fraction. She pointed toward a side room. Leave your things in there. We're eating soon, and please don't get Grandpa worked up. It sounded caring. It was control. I walked toward the living room and saw Grandpa Elias in his chair by the fireplace, newspaper open, reading glasses perched low. When he looked up and saw me, his whole face brightened in a way that still hit me in the chest. I hugged him gently, feeling how light he'd gotten, how sharp his shoulders were under the cardigan, but his grip stayed strong. "There's my boy," he said. His voice warmed the room in a way my mother's never could. I held him for an extra second because I didn't know what this day would cost him. Then, right before we moved toward the dining room, my mother pressed a white envelope into my hand with a quiet urgency. My name was written on the front in her handwriting. She leaned in like she was sharing a secret meant to protect him. "Your grandpa asked me to give you this," she whispered. "Don't mention the amount. Things are a little tight this year." I closed my fingers around the envelope and felt the paper crease slightly. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I knew what was inside. It wasn't just a check. It was their story. And I was going to let it fall apart in front of everyone. The house was dressed for Thanksgiving the way my mother dresses for anything that might be judged. Everything looked curated down to the smallest detail, like a magazine spread where no one actually lives. The dining table was set with the good china candles already lit, even though it was still afternoon, folded napkins, sitting like little sculptures, a centerpiece that smelled like cinnamon and money. The air carried turkey and stuffing and something sweet baking in the kitchen, and for a second, if you didn't know better, you could believe this was a normal family about to do a normal holiday. That's what made it dangerous. Marianne's version of normal always comes with a trap hidden under the tablecloth. I kept the envelope in my hand as we drifted through the pre-dinner choreography. My mother moved like a conductor, adjusting a place setting, straightening a runner, directing my father with two-word instructions he followed without looking up. Gordon had a glass of wine already, and it wasn't his first. He sat in the den with the football game on mute, eyes fixed on the screen, like it was safer to watch strangers collide than to feel anything in his own house. When he glanced at me, it was a nod that didn't quite reach welcome. "Good to see you," he said. "You too," I replied, and that was the whole exchange. My mother did not ask me about my flight. She didn't ask how Austin was. She didn't ask if I was tired. She asked the two questions that mattered to someone trying to keep control of a narrative. How long are you staying? Did you bring much? She asked them with a smile and soft tone, but I heard the intent underneath as clearly as I hear intent in a scammer's voicemail. She wanted to know how much time she had and what tools I might have brought to ruin the story she'd prepared. I carried my bag into the side room she pointed to and noticed she followed me just far enough to watch where I set it down. Not like a host, like a guard. I returned to the living room and sat with Grandpa Elias for a few minutes, because that's what I came for, really. Evidence and justice mattered, but the center of all of it was still this man, still his love, still the trust someone had weaponized. He looked smaller than the last time I saw him, but his eyes were clear. When he smiled at me, it wasn't a performance. It was relief. "How's Texas?" he asked, voice rasped with age but steady. "Hot," I said, trying to keep the warmth in my own voice. "But good. Work's been busy. You always were busy," he said, and there was pride there. "Always chasing what's right." The words hit harder than he meant them to. I asked him questions that sounded like casual grandson small talk, but each one had a purpose. "You been on email much lately?" I asked, like I was interested in his hobbies. He chuckled. "Your mother keeps trying to get me to use that tablet," he said. "I prefer my phone. But yes, I check email. The bank sends confirmations. I keep them." I nodded, like that was normal, because for him it was. He does everything by the book. "When you did that transfer," I said carefully, not naming an amount, "yet did you do it yourself?" He looked at me like the question was odd. "Of course I did," he said. "I'm old, not helpless." Then he lowered his voice slightly, leaning in. "I called Marianne first, though," he added, almost like a confession. "Told her I wanted to help you out. I asked her to make sure you knew it was from me because you get busy and you don't always check that account. She said she'd take care of it. My stomach tightened so fast it stole my breath for half a second. There it was, the doorway. The moment she had access not to my credentials but to his trust. Grandpa Elias had handed her the narrative before the money ever moved, and she'd promised to deliver it like a loving messenger. Instead, she'd used it as a key. I forced my face to stay neutral. That was kind of you, I said. I just didn't want you to miss it, he replied. You work hard. You deserve a little ease. I swallowed down the burn behind my eyes. My mother's voice floated in from the kitchen, calling for someone to bring in ice to set out appetizers to move a platter. Everything sounded normal if you didn't know what she'd done. Then Sloane appeared. She came in like a camera had turned on, hair-perfect outfit chosen with intention, smile wide enough to pass as joy. But when she hugged me, her body stayed stiff. Her arms wrapped around me, yet she didn't settle into it. Her hand slid over my shoulder and I felt her fingers tense, like she was measuring how solid I was, how hard it would be to push me off balance. The ring on her left hand caught the light and threw little flashes across the wall, tiny bright cuts that made my vision flicker. It looked exactly like it had in her photo. Real. Expensive. Loud. Rhett, she said, voice sweet, a little too sweet. I'm so glad you made it. I held her at arm's length for just a second because I needed to see her eyes. They were glossy, but not with happiness. With nerves. Behind her, Blaine Whitlock stepped into the room like he belonged there. Suit that fit too well for a family holiday. Watch that looked like it wanted attention. He extended his hand before Sloane even finished introducing him. Rhett, he said, firm grip, practiced smile. Finally. Sloane talks about you. I took his hand and felt the control in the gesture, the way he held on a fraction longer than necessary, the way his eyes scanned me quickly. Not just my face, but my shoulders, my bag strap, the thickness of the folder under my arm. He wasn't looking at me like a future brother-in-law. He was assessing threat. Congratulations, I said, keeping my tone smooth. When do you two get engaged? It was a simple question, deliberately placed. A normal person answers it easily. Sloane's smile flickered and she opened her mouth, but Blaine cut in. Late August, he said, voice steady. Best decision I ever made. He pulled Sloane close and kissed her temple like a brand stamp. Sloane laughed softly, too high. Yeah, she said. End of summer. Her answer slid around the exact date like she didn't want to touch it. I filed it away. I didn't push further. Not yet. Marianne appeared beside us with a tray of appetizers, smiling like this was the happiest room in the world. Isn't he wonderful, she said, looking at Blaine like she'd chosen him herself. Then her gaze moved to me and landed on my hands. Why don't you come help me in the kitchen, she said immediately, the way a teacher redirects a kid who's asking the wrong questions. We need an extra set of hands and your grandfather shouldn't have to talk so much. It sounded caring. It was separation. She wanted to pull me away from Grandpa Elias, away from the person who could confirm the truth without my involvement. I followed her into the kitchen because refusing would have been information. In there, Marianne ran the room with small clipped commands, turning everything into a schedule. Plates at 4:30, turkey at 5, dessert at 6:30. She murmured as if timing could prevent consequences. Each time I tried to drift back toward the living room, she found a reason to redirect me. Can you grab the serving spoon? Can you check the oven? Can you take these napkins to the table? When I returned to the living room anyway, she followed, speaking over me, laughing too loud at Grandpa's jokes, touching his shoulder with a hand that looked affectionate and felt like ownership. The house filled gradually with a few relatives, an aunt, a cousin, people who didn't really know me anymore but still wanted to be seen at the right house on the right holiday. I noticed how they glanced at my mother before they spoke, how they laughed at her cues, how the whole family ecosystem revolved around her approval. Power doesn't always look like shouting. Sometimes it looks like everyone waiting to see which face Marianne is wearing before they choose their words. I tested the temperature with something small, the way you tap ice to see if it cracks. While we stood near the counter, I let my voice go half joking. Work's been wild lately, I said. I've been on a lot of wire fraud cases. People are getting bold. POAs, fake signatures, the whole thing. I kept my eyes on a dish towel like it didn't matter, but I watched their reflections in the window. Marianne's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second, then she smoothed it into a smile. Sloane blinked fast like her contact lenses were suddenly dry. Blaine didn't react at all. He just lifted his glass and sipped like he'd been trained not to bite. That lack of reaction was its own reaction. People who are innocent usually ask questions. People who are guilty usually act bored. My mother clapped her hands lightly, redirecting attention. "Okay, everyone," she said, bright and firm. "One rule this year. No talking about money, no talking about work, and please don't get Grandpa worked up. He's had a long week." Her eyes landed on me when she said it, sweet as frosting, sharp as a warning. She was building the frame in advance, the same way she built the POA, the same way she built the check inside the envelope. If the truth came out, she wanted everyone to already believe the problem wasn't the theft. The problem would be me. I nodded like I agreed, like I was just the obedient son coming home for turkey. Inside, I felt something settle into place. I understood the play now. They weren't just hiding what happened. They were actively preparing a version of events where Grandpa Elias was unreliable and I was reckless. They were laying down an excuse path in real time. I walked past the kitchen counter and saw another white envelope sitting there, untouched, my name written in my mother's handwriting, the same neat control, the same theatrical curve. It wasn't the one in my pocket. It was a spare, or a backup, or a prop waiting for its cue. I kept my face calm as we moved toward the dining room candles, flickering plates clinking, everyone sliding into their assigned seats like actors hitting their marks. The air smelled incredible. The room looked perfect. And I knew with the same certainty I feel when I watch a scam unfold in logs that the perfection was the cover. Somewhere under that tablecloth was a lie they'd been rehearsing for months, and all it would take to expose it was one sentence at the right time. The hour before dinner stretched the way storms do, quiet on the surface and violent underneath. Marianne found a reason to pull me into the kitchen while the oven hummed and the smell of turkey filled the air. Her voice low and smooth, like she was negotiating a truce that only existed for her benefit. She stood, close hands, folded eyes, steady. "It's good you came," she said. "But don't make things tense. Your grandfather's weak. You understand that." I kept my gaze on the counter, on the clean lines and polished stone she loved because it made messes look impossible. "I do understand," I said. "That's why I want him to be at ease. The truth is what puts him at ease." Her mouth tightened for a second, then she changed direction without missing a beat, listing sacrifices like receipts. The years she drove me to activities, the nights she stayed up worrying, the way she'd always kept the family together. It was guilt dressed as gratitude, a familiar tactic meant to soften me enough to step away from the evidence. I listened without interrupting because interruption is how you lose information. When she paused, she added something she couldn't help herself from adding. "There's still a few thousand left in that account," she said lightly, like she was reassuring me. "So it's not like you're broke." The sentence landed wrong. She shouldn't have known the number. Not the amount, not the fact that it wasn't empty. That detail only lives in statements and screens. I felt the confirmation settle in my chest. She hadn't heard about the account. She had seen it. I didn't challenge her. I let the silence do the work and watched her fill it with a smile that came a beat too late. I waited until she was distracted before I found Sloane in the hall that led to the backyard, the sliding door fogged from the temperature change. The house muffled sound there, just enough privacy for the truth to peek out if it wanted to. I kept my voice low. "Whose idea was the money?" I asked. "Did you even know what a power of attorney is before this?" She stiffened like she'd been cued. "I don't know anything," she said quickly. "Don't ask me." The words sounded practiced, delivered exactly the way someone delivers a line they were told would keep them safe. I didn't argue. I asked the question that had no safe answer. "If you didn't know anything, why did you call me and tell me not to come?" Her lips parted and closed. Her eyes slid toward the living room, toward Blaine's voice carrying from inside. The look was enough. Control doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's a glance for permission. She swallowed and said something that came out before she could stop it. You don't understand, she whispered. If the wedding isn't right, if it doesn't look right, everything falls apart. Then she shut down, jaw-locking shoulders, pulling in like she'd said too much. The admission hung there between us. Money wasn't just money. It was scaffolding for an image they'd already built and spent against. Blaine found me before I could step away again, a drink appearing in his hand like a peace offering. He angled his body to block the doorway and smiled the way men do when they think they're speaking from a position of authority. "Can we talk?" he said. We stood near the living room, the football game still muted, Gordon staring through it like it was safer than looking at either of us. Blaine spoke in smooth abstractions, words that sounded reassuring until you tried to hold them. The funds were a temporary allocation, he said. Capital moves. It comes back around. You work in tech, so you see everything like a crime. I let him finish. Then I asked the simplest question I had. If it's legitimate, show me the contract and the repayment schedule. He didn't answer it. He leaned closer instead, lowering his voice. You're putting stress on an old man, he said. Is that what you want? The threat wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It rested on the assumption that I would care more about how I looked than about what was true. When he added almost casually, everything's been arranged, so Elias won't be shocked, something cold clicked into place. Arranged meant discussed. Planned meant anticipated. They weren't reacting to a problem. They were managing a response. I excused myself and went back to the side room where I'd left my things. The zipper on my laptop bag wasn't the way I'd left it. The folder inside had been shifted, the neat edge misaligned. I checked the smaller pocket and felt my stomach drop again. The cable for the mini projector was gone, not misplaced, removed. I didn't say anything. I didn't storm back into the room. I simply noted it. Fear makes people sloppy, and they had just shown me they were afraid enough to try to disarm me. My phone buzzed in my hand before I could close the bag. A security alert from the bank. An attempted login. A change to notification settings. The timing was precise enough to feel intentional. Someone inside this house was still trying to control the narrative in real time. I breathed through it and shifted plans. I sent the PDF to myself again. I uploaded backups. I prepared to open everything directly from my laptop if I had to rotate the screen to speak without visuals, if that was the only option left. I found the missing cable later tucked into a kitchen drawer beneath utensils Marianne had just sorted, and I left it there. Let them believe they'd won that small battle. Marianne clapped her hands and announced it was time, voice bright and commanding, the way a director calls actors to their marks. She already had the envelope in her hand, fingers curled around it with proprietary ease. I recognized it instantly. The $200 story. The prop meant to freeze the room before any questions could breathe. I watched her gather everyone toward the table and felt the final calculation settle in. They weren't going to rely on denial. They were going to apply pressure. And if pressure didn't work, they were prepared to paint me as the problem. I slipped the envelope into my pocket and followed them to the dining room, already deciding how to make the truth land without the tools they tried to take from me. The air changed the moment we crossed into the dining room, heavier and quieter, like everyone sensed the edge even if they couldn't name it. Candles flickered. Plates waited. Grandpa Elias was guided into his chair at the head of the table like an honored guest and a liability at the same time. Before he could settle, Marianne caught my arm and steered me into a corner near the hallway, her grip light but unyielding. She held out a thin stack of papers, clipped neatly. This will make everything smooth, she said softly. Just sign, and we can all relax. I glanced down. The language was vague by design, something that could pass as a family loan, or an acknowledgement of investment, words chosen to blur consent and accountability. If I signed, I would be saying the money moved with my approval. I would be erasing the crime myself. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her. I asked a question that framed the truth so it couldn't escape. If everything was proper, I said, why does this need to be signed right now, minutes before dinner? Why wasn't it done earlier? And why do you need my signature if the power of attorney already gave you authority? She froze just for a heartbeat. It was enough. Sloan appeared behind her eyes, bright with panic, and said the sentence that gave the whole game away. Just sign it, she pleaded. Then it's over. Don't break this. Break it, not fix it, not understand it. Break it. In their version of events, the lie was the structure holding everything up, and I was the weight that could collapse it. Blaine stepped in, voice calm and measured, but the content sharpened. If you turn this into a scene, he said, you'll ruin your family's name. Elias can't handle that. You'll be the one responsible. It was a moral sentence handed down before any evidence could speak an attempt to assign guilt in advance. I heard a small cough from the table, and Marianne raised her voice just enough for everyone to hear. He's a little forgetful today, she said, smiling at the room. So let's all be gentle. The move was clean. Established doubt before the truth had a chance. I stepped away from them and went to Grandpa Elias, kneeling slightly so my voice stayed between us. Do you still have the confirmation email? I asked. He looked at me, then reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone with careful hands. I keep things, he said. Your mother knows that. He opened his email, and there it was, the bank's message with the date and amount spelled out in unambiguous numbers. He scrolled, brow furrowing. I asked Marianne to give you the gift, he said quietly. She told me you'd already thanked her, said you were grateful. The room felt suddenly smaller. The loop was complete. She told him I knew. She told me he'd only given a little. She used his age and medication as cover if the two stories ever touched. I straightened and took the seat I'd already chosen directly across from him, where he could see my face and everyone else could see me speak. I set my laptop within reach and kept the envelope in my pocket unopened. Marianne moved into position like nothing was wrong, lighting a candle that was already lit, smiling for an audience that wanted to believe her. Let's begin, she said. Grandpa Elias picked up the carving knife, steadying his hand. I watched the blade press into the turkey and waited. I waited for the moment they thought the performance had worked, for the second they relaxed into the lie. When Grandpa lifted his glass, I felt my pulse slow, not because I was calm, but because the decision had been made. I didn't need the projector. I didn't need the cable. I didn't need permission. I needed one sentence placed exactly where it couldn't be ignored. I felt the envelope against my ribs and knew that when I spoke, the room would change forever. Grandpa Elias started carving like he always did, slow and careful, the knife sawing through crisp skin, while Marianne ran the room with a smile that never warmed her eyes. Candles flickered against the white tablecloth. The house smelled like turkey and cinnamon and something expensive trying to pass for comfort. I sat where I'd chosen across from him, envelope heavy in my pocket, laptop close enough to open in one motion. Elias lifted his glass first. His voice was steady, proud, too full of love for people who didn't deserve it. He talked about age, about gratitude, about the bridges he'd built and the family he'd tried to keep standing. Then he looked at me and said he wanted to help me take the next step. A home. A future. Something lasting. He mentioned the gift like it was already a settled fact, something he'd done with joy. I waited until the room relaxed into Marianne's script, until Sloane's shoulders loosened by a fraction, until Blaine's smile sharpened like he thought the hard part was over. Then I said it plainly, the way you read a number into the record. Thank you, Grandpa. Thank you for the $200 check. The knife stopped mid-cut. Not a pause. A full stop. Elias turned his head and looked straight at me, eyes clear, jaw set. What, $200, he said. I pulled the check out, held it up like a receipt. This, I said. Mom gave it to me. Marianne moved faster than anyone else at the table. Dad, you're confused, she said, voice bright, sweet, urgent. Your heart meds. Elias didn't blink. I'm not confused, he said. The gift I wired Rhett was $500,000. The air went flat. Someone's fork scraped the plate. Sloane's face lost color so quickly it looked painful. Blaine's eyes flicked to the door like he was already calculating exits. Marianne tried again, louder, for an audience. He's been forgetful today. Everyone knows, show me. Elias said, cutting her off. Rhett, show me the account. I opened my laptop right there, no ceremony. I rotated the screen toward him. The numbers filled the glow between us. August 14th, incoming wire $500,000. August 15th, outgoing wire 409.99 800. Elias's hand tightened around his glass. Where did it go? He whispered. That's what I wanted to know, I said, keeping my voice level. So I found the destination. I scrolled to the receiving account details and said the name out loud. Blaine Whitlock. Blaine's smile didn't vanish. It cracked. This is inappropriate, he said. You're doing this at dinner. Elias's eyes went to him sharp as a drafting pencil. Sit, he said. Answer. Blaine's jaw worked and he tried to steer it back into polished language. It was an investment allocation. Temporary. It'll be returned. Where's the contract, I asked. Where's the repayment schedule? Where's the authorization from me? Blaine's gaze slid to Marianne, then back to me. You're stressing an old man, he said, voice dropping. Do you want that on your conscience? Elias pushed his chair back an inch, the sound clean and final. Stop talking like you care about my heart, he said. You care about my money. Marianne lunged for control again. Rhett, please, she said. We can discuss this privately, not in front of everyone. I didn't argue. I showed. I pulled up the POA PDF, zoomed in on the signature block. I signed legal documents with a small mark here, I said, pointing to the empty corner. It's not present. This wasn't signed by me. Marianne's eyes narrowed. That's insane. I slid the screen to the form fields and the handwriting. You fill out forms the same way, I said quietly. The same strokes, the same pressure, the same crossing on your T's. Sloane made a sound like she'd been hit. Stop, she whispered. I clicked to the timeline I'd built. Wire filed, wire received, wire sent out. Then Sloane's public posts, the resort, the flights, the ring, the engagement announcement. Dates aligned like nails. Sloane broke first. Tears spilled fast, messy, the kind she couldn't curate. I didn't mean, she said, then caught herself and looked toward Blaine like she needed permission to keep breathing. We needed it, she blurted. Everything had to look right. He said it had to be right. Blaine's face hardened. Don't do that. He snapped at her, then turned to Elias. This is a family misunderstanding. Elias's laugh was small and bitter. A misunderstanding doesn't require forged paperwork, he said. Marianne reached for the last lever she had. Think about the family, she pleaded. Think about Sloane's future. Don't do something you can't undo. Elias stood slowly, steadying himself on the table. His eyes were wet, but his voice wasn't. I already can't undo what you did, he said. You used me. You used my love like a tool. Blaine pushed back from the table. I'm leaving, he said, aiming the words at the room like they were authority. Elias didn't move. Go, he said, but you'll answer for this. Blaine walked out without looking at Sloane. She surged after him, screaming his name, then turned back at me with mascara streaked and face ruined. You destroyed my life, she cried. You did, I said. You just didn't think anyone would make you look at it. She grabbed her purse and ran. Gordon stayed seated like he'd been nailed there, then stood with a slow wobble. I'm going to bed, he muttered, and disappeared up the stairs. And then it was just the three of us. Me, Marianne, Elias. Marianne sank into a chair, hands shaking, voice small now. Please, she whispered, don't call anyone. We can fix this. Elias pulled out his phone. Marianne grabbed his wrist. Dad. He pulled free. I am your father, he said, quiet and terrible. And I'm done being your cover. He dialed. When the dispatcher answered, he gave the address in a voice that didn't tremble. I need to report a theft, he said, and fraud. I watched Marianne's face collapse as the call connected, and I understood something clean and irreversible. This was no longer a ruined holiday. This was a case, with consequences. And I had chosen the side that wouldn't change its story to keep the peace. The officers arrived while the turkey went cold and the candles burned down into puddles. Two of them calm and procedural, the older one asking questions like he'd done it 1,000 times, the younger one taking notes and watching faces. Marianne tried to speak, first tried to shape it, but Elias cut her off with a tired wave. The money was a gift, he said. I transferred it. It was taken. I handed over what I'd prepared without drama-printed statements, the wire confirmations, the POA PDF screenshots with timestamps, Blaine's engagement post, Sloane's photos, my notes on the missing signature mark. I kept my tone steady, not because I felt steady, but because facts don't get to wobble just because your family is crying. The older officer looked at Elias. "Do you want to press charges?" "Yes," Elias said. No hesitation. Then the question turned to me. "And you?" the officer asked. "Do you want to pursue this?" I thought about Marianne's envelope, about Sloane's call trying to keep me away, about the attempted bank login while I was in the house, about the papers Marianne tried to get me to sign to turn a crime into consent. "Yes," I said. "I want to pursue this." Marianne made a sound like she'd been punched. "Rhett," she whispered, like my name was supposed to fix it. It didn't. After the officers left with copies and instructions, Elias walked me to the door. The rain had eased into a steady mist and the driveway shone under the porch light. He looked older than he had an hour earlier, not because he'd aged, but because he'd seen what he didn't want to see. "She told me you thanked her," he said quietly. "She told me you were grateful." I swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "Don't be. You gave me the truth when it would have been easier to let me believe a lie." The next morning we went to the station, signed formal statements. A financial crimes detective listened, asked about the POA filing date, the wirepath, the receiving account. He told us what I already knew the bank would investigate, and because wires and forged documents cross lines that don't belong to one town, larger agencies could get involved. The case would take time, but the documentation was solid. News in Carmel moves the way fog does, quiet and unavoidable. People who'd smiled at Marianne in church stopped meeting her eyes. Committees she'd chaired suddenly needed space. Sloane's employer didn't want her face attached to a public scandal. Blaine scrubbed his online presence, deleted photos, changed headlines, tried to disappear from a story he'd helped write. It didn't make him innocent. It just made him practiced. The legal outcome didn't arrive in one dramatic moment. It came in steps: bank findings, document reviews, statements, charges built on what could be proven. Marianne faced the core of it: forged authority, fraudulent transfer, deception carried out with planning. Sloane was tied to the spending, the timing, the attempt to keep me away, the benefits she displayed publicly. Blaine's exposure depended on what could be shown about what he knew and when he knew it, but he still lost what mattered to people like him: credibility. Gordon filed for divorce quietly, like he did everything that required backbone. He chose distance over accountability, but even that was a kind of admission. Marianne lost her marriage, her standing, the carefully built image she'd treated like oxygen. Sloane called and texted and left voicemails that swung between rage and pleading. I blocked the numbers. Not out of cruelty, out of survival. Elias and I talked more after that. Not about them, but about what was real. He told me there was a moment right after I thanked him for 200 when he almost let it go. Almost convinced himself he was confused because believing that would hurt less than believing his daughter could do what she did. "But then I saw your face," he said, "and I knew you were giving me a chance to see it." Weeks later, back in Austin, I bought a house. Not because money fixes betrayal, but because I needed a life that didn't require permission. I built a home office that felt like my own mind, clean, protected, honest. Elias and I had dinner over video call once a month. Sometimes I flew out. We talked about maps, his bridges, the stories he loved, the weather, my work. The past stayed where it belonged. A letter came from Sloane, eventually handwritten, long, full of apology and justification tangled together. I read it once, then shredded it, watching the paper fall into strips. Forgiveness might be noble, but I wasn't interested in being noble. I was interested in being whole. They took the money. They tried to take the gift. They tried to take Elias's trust and my name and turn them into tools. They failed at the one thing that mattered most. They didn't get to decide who I became after. I've replayed that night more times than I can count. Not because I enjoy the pain, but because moments like that change the shape of you. Before Thanksgiving, I believed betrayal came from strangers from faceless accounts and hidden IP addresses from people who never knew your middle name or the way you took your coffee. I was wrong. The most dangerous lies are the ones wrapped in family language, delivered with a smile, justified as for your own good. What happened at that table didn't just cost me money. It forced me to accept a truth that a lot of people spend their entire lives running from. Blood does not guarantee loyalty, and love does not excuse harm. For a long time, I asked myself if I went too far, if I should have swallowed it, if keeping the peace was worth more than breaking everything open. That question haunted me in the quiet moments in the drive back to Austin, in the empty rooms of a house that suddenly felt larger than it needed to be. But the answer always came back the same. Peace built on lies isn't peace. It's paralysis. It freezes you in place while other people decide what you're allowed to know, what you're allowed to keep, and how much of yourself you're allowed to lose so they can stay comfortable. What stays with me most isn't the shouting or the accusations. It's my grandfather's face when he realized he wasn't confused, that his memory hadn't failed him, that the problem wasn't his age or his medication but the people he trusted most. In that moment, I understood something deeper than anger. I understood responsibility, not just to myself, but to him. Letting the lie stand would have been easier for me in the short term, but it would have sentenced him to the rest of his life doubting his own mind. I couldn't live with that. I still can't. Walking away from parts of my family wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of self-preservation. There's a difference, and it matters. I didn't cut them off because I'm heartless. I did it because I finally learned that access to my life is not an entitlement. It's something people earn through honesty, respect, and restraint. Once someone proves they're willing to rewrite reality to suit themselves, the only sane response is distance. Not drama, not screaming. Distance. If you're listening to this and something in your chest feels tight, it's probably because you recognize pieces of your own life in mine. Maybe it wasn't money. Maybe it was your time, your reputation, your role in the family, or the version of you they needed to control. Maybe you've been told you're too sensitive, making a big deal out of nothing, or hurting everyone by bringing it up. Let me tell you something I wish someone had told me sooner. Asking for the truth does not make you cruel. Refusing to accept a lie does not make you selfish, and protecting your sanity does not make you disloyal. I didn't come out of this as a hero. I came out quieter, more deliberate, less interested in applause, and more interested in peace that doesn't require me to shrink. I still believe in family. I just believe in chosen family now, in people who don't need deception to feel secure, who don't confuse control with care. And I believe more than ever that integrity is what you do when the cost is real and the audience is small. When the room finally went quiet, what stayed with me wasn't the money or the damage it caused. It was the understanding that some truths arrive late, and when they do, they ask something difficult of us. Not anger, not punishment, just clarity. Sometimes growing up isn't about winning or losing, it's about choosing not to lie to ourselves anymore. And as uncomfortable as that choice can be, it's also the moment we stop being controlled by what others decide for us. If there's one thing this story left me with, it's this. We're all carrying things we don't talk about. Old silences, family expectations, moments where we felt small for asking honest questions. And maybe if we slow down long enough, we can meet those moments with a little more compassion for ourselves and for the people who didn't know how to do better. Not to excuse harm, but to release ourselves from it. If you've listened this far, thank you for sitting with me. Truly. If you feel like sharing, you're welcome to leave a few lines in the comments, only if you want to. Sometimes writing it out helps. And if this kind of quiet human storytelling speaks to you, I'd be glad to have you here. You can subscribe and be part of this small community where we listen first and judge less. Take care of yourself. Thank you for being here with me tonight, and I'll see you again in the next story.